She only wanted scraps. He only wanted silence. But when a desperate widow offered to watch his baby for a slice of bread, neither imagined the pain, truth, and love that would unravel their lives forever. The knock came like a whisper against the wind, soft, unsure, nearly lost in the rustle of dry grass curling at the edges of the porch. Thomas Cade didn't move right away. He was at the table, a plate of untouched cornbread growing cold beside the baby's cradle, where tiny fists stirred under a quilt stitched long ago by a woman whose name he no longer dared speak aloud. The land had a way of wearing things down, fences, faith, men, and Thomas had learned to let knocks pass. Most folks didn't knock anymore, not on a ranch this far out, and not on a door owned by a man who answered less than he used to. But then came the second knock, louder, a little more desperate. Thomas stood. By the time he opened the door, the sun had dropped low enough to bleed gold across the porch, casting long shadows that made the woman before him look like more ghost than flesh. She was thin, not the kind that came from dainty living, but the kind that suggested days without proper meals. Her dress hung off her shoulders like it belonged to someone else. Dust clung to her hem, and her arms, both of them, were wrapped tight around a swaddled child that wasn't hers. "I'm not here to beg," she said quickly, voice hoarse. "Not for me. I saw your baby through the window, just thought maybe you'd let me watch her a bit, for a slice of bread, maybe the crust if it's easier to part with." Thomas said nothing, not right away. His eyes dropped to the child in her arms. The bundle twitched once, breathing, thank God, and then he looked back at the woman. She wasn't lying. That much he could tell, but she was on the edge of something. Starvation, maybe, or worse, hope. The kind that cracked people when it got denied. "Name?" he asked finally, his voice flat from disuse. "June," she said, "June Mather." "That your baby?" June's arms tightened. "No, she's gone, buried up near Abner's Ridge, but I remember how to hold one." Thomas stepped aside. The door creaked wider. "Don't touch mine unless I say so." "I wouldn't," June whispered, stepping through like she might break if the floor gave even a little. Inside, warmth met her like a slap. Not the rich kind, but a lived-in heat, the smell of wood smoke and faint milk. The baby, Thomas's, let out a hiccup and settled again. June's eyes went soft. Thomas poured water into a tin cup and slid it toward her without a word. She reached for it with both hands, trembling so bad half of it sloshed out. "You walk far?" he asked. 3 days, had a mule the first 2. Last day was on foot. She wiped her mouth, ashamed of the speed with which she'd emptied the cup. "From where?" "Don't matter." Thomas didn't argue. He didn't need her whole story. Just the part that explained what kind of woman offered to babysit a stranger's child for bread. The baby stirred. June looked toward the cradle. She didn't move closer, just watched, chest rising with something she hadn't let herself feel in weeks. Thomas noticed. He walked over, lifted the child with practiced ease, and held her with the same quiet a carpenter held a tool he'd made himself. "Her name's Clara," he said. June nodded. "She's beautiful." "You any good with babies, June?" "I was a mother," she said, too quickly. Then quieter, "Still am maybe, just not one with arms full anymore." Thomas studied her, the way her jaw twitched, the rawness in her throat, like every word was something torn from under the skin. He motioned to a chair. "You can sit, rest. You won't get bread till after." "After what?" "After I see you mean it. Talk's easy. So's looking soft at a baby. You sit. Wait, don't touch nothing, don't lie, that earns you bread." June didn't flinch. She moved to the chair and lowered herself like someone who'd been on their feet too long. Her knees shook. Her fingers flexed in her lap. Thomas laid Clara back in the cradle and returned to the table. He didn't eat the cornbread, just stared at it. "Wasn't always just me," he said after a while, voice low. "Had a wife, Sarah. She passed birthing Clara." June blinked back something hot. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, she died praying." June's breath hitched. She didn't say it, but she hadn't prayed in weeks. Not since Abner's Ridge. Not since the wind had screamed across that grave with no stone and only her hands to bury a daughter with no name. "I'm not here to take anything," she said. "I've done wrong in the past, stolen bread, lied once or twice, but not today, not now. I needed to see a baby breathing again." That struck something. Thomas didn't show it, but his hand curled tighter around the edge of the table. "You say your girl's up near Abner's?" "Yeah." "Name?" "Didn't live long enough to get one." Thomas nodded slowly. "She got a grave." "She got me," June said. "On my knees in the dirt, that's all." Silence again. Then, unexpectedly, Clara let out a soft cry, not a scream, just a whimper, enough to pull Thomas from the table. He lifted her once more, but she squirmed against his chest. "Here," he said suddenly, walking toward June. "Take her." June froze. "You said." "I said not unless I say so. I'm saying so." She reached out slowly, arms trembling, and took Clara into her chest. The baby calmed instantly. June's breath caught. It wasn't joy. Not exactly. Just a weight she remembered, a warmth she'd forgotten. "She knows," June whispered. "Knows when arms ain't afraid to hold her." Thomas stood over her for a moment, something unreadable in his gaze. Then he turned away and began slicing the cornbread. Not much, just a third. He handed it to her without ceremony. "You earned it." "Thank you," she said, and she meant it so deep her hands shook more than before. She ate slowly, mindful not to spill crumbs on Clara's swaddle. "You planning on staying in these parts?" Thomas asked. "Don't know," she admitted. "Don't got anywhere to be." "You'll sleep in the barn tonight." June nodded. "More than I deserve." "And tomorrow, we'll see if you're worth more than crumbs." She looked up sharply. "You mean?" "I mean you're holding my baby like she's still yours. That ain't nothing, might be something." Outside, the wind picked up. Dust swept across the porch, biting at the wood, scratching at the window. But inside, Clara slept steady against a chest that had once known loss. And June, though worn to the bone and hollow from sorrow, breathed in sync with something again. The night settled slow. Thomas didn't speak more. He handed her a lantern and pointed to the barn. June obeyed, Clara already back in his arms. But neither forgot that moment, that flicker of something warmer than firelight. The barn was old but not rotting. June had slept in worse, under wagons, beside dying fires, once beneath a bridge thick with bats and bitter air. But this one, it held something different, a strange sense of permission, of allowed stillness. Hay had been spread in a corner, fresh enough to not itch too much. A single blanket hung over the edge of an old stall, clearly placed with thought, not accident. The lantern Thomas had given her swung gently on a rusted hook above, casting long amber shadows against the wooden beams. June didn't sleep right away. Her stomach, though less hollow now, seemed confused by the food. Her limbs ached from walking, but not enough to pull her under. Instead, she sat against the wall, knees drawn up to her chest, eyes fixed on the lantern's flame. She should have cried, should have let it all out, her child, her shame, the unspoken things done just to make it another day. But the tears didn't come. She'd shed too many already. Somewhere along Abner's Ridge, she'd run dry. Wind whispered through the gaps in the boards, carrying the night sounds, the soft shifting of horses, the gentle creak of wood settling, and in the distance, the faint whimper of a child being rocked back to sleep. June closed her eyes. Morning broke not with sunlight, but with the thud of boots near the barn doors. Thomas didn't knock, just pushed the doors open and stepped inside, backlit by the cold gray dawn. He carried a tin mug in one hand, steam rising from it, and a bucket in the other. "You sleep?" "Some," June said, brushing hay from her dress. He set the bucket down near the stall. "Water's clean. Wasn't sure if you'd run off." "Didn't have anywhere to run to." Thomas grunted, handing her the mug. It was strong coffee, bitter as bark. She drank it anyway. He studied her for a beat longer than necessary, then turned. "Come on. If you're not dead, you can work." Thomas wasn't a man who gave instructions more than once. He moved like a man who'd been working alone too long, efficient, silent, hard-edged. June followed without asking where they were going. He led her behind the cabin, to the pen where two goats stood chewing thoughtfully near a leaning fence. "That one's Daisy," he said, pointing at the brown one. "She kicks, other one's Belle, she don't." "Milk." He nodded. "And the fence needs mending. Took a hit in the windstorm 2 nights back. You know how to hammer." "I know how to try." "Good enough." He didn't watch her long, just pointed her to a pail and the nails and left her to it. The morning passed in small tasks and smaller words. June mended the fence in slow, focused silence, pausing only to rub the stiffness from her knuckles. Thomas moved between chores, always near but never close, cutting wood, checking traps, mending a harness strap that had cracked from dry rot. Once he stopped near the fence and asked without turning, "Why here?" June looked up. Her hands were stained from dust and sap. "Didn't choose it, just kept walking. Your lantern was the first light I saw in miles." Thomas didn't respond, just kept hammering a hinge back into place on the shed. Inside the cabin, Clara stirred again near noon. June wasn't told to go to her. She just heard the cry and followed it. Thomas was still outside, dragging feed sacks. June washed her hands in the basin by the door before lifting the baby gently into her arms. Clara settled quickly, blinking up with eyes too old for her face. June swayed instinctively, whispering nonsense into the soft curls at the baby's temple. "You smell like wood smoke and goats," came Thomas's voice from the doorway. June turned. She didn't seem to mind. He stepped inside, setting the feed sack against the wall. "You've held her more in 2 days than I have in weeks. You scared of breaking her." "I'm scared of getting used to her. That's not the same." June didn't answer. She just lowered her cheek to Clara's head and let the silence speak. By the 3rd day, Thomas had stopped giving her instructions. She woke with the sunrise, washed with the bucket, helped with the chores, and sometimes took the liberty of starting the fire in the hearth. She never went into the root cellar. She didn't pry about the closed upstairs door. And she didn't ask about the photo on the mantel, faded, yellowed, a young woman with soft eyes and a man who almost smiled. On the 4th night, after Clara had been fed and the fire banked low, June sat near the window and finally asked the thing she hadn't dared before. "Why'd you let me in?" Thomas looked up from the carving in his hand. Another wooden animal, maybe a fox this time, shaped with slow precision. "Because you knocked, and you looked like you might fall over dead if I didn't." "That simple." "Sometimes things are." June nodded slowly, but she didn't believe him. It was on the 5th morning that the first danger came, not from within, but without. Thomas was away from the cabin, down by the creek checking traps. June was gathering eggs when the horses arrived. 3 of them. Men dressed in dust and meanness, the kind who didn't ask before helping themselves to someone else's land. The first one swung down and looked around, lips curled. "Reckon we're close to Cade's place, boys." The second spat into the grass. "Sure smells like Cade's goat piss." The third, older, sharper in the eyes, noticed June. "Well now, this ain't the Cade I remember." June straightened. "You've got no business here." The sharp-eyed man smirked. "Lady, men like us, we make business where we find it." She didn't run, she didn't back down. Her fists clenched at her sides. "Thomas'll be back any minute." "Good," the man said. "We've got things to discuss." June didn't move from the porch, not even when the youngest tried to circle behind her. She spoke only one sentence, but it carried like gunfire. "Touch that door, and I'll gut you with the rusty blade by the wash bucket." The man paused, hands mid-reach. The older one laughed, feisty. You don't know the half, June muttered. Thomas returned before things turned worse. He came from the north side of the cabin, rifle slung loose, but eyes sharp. The kind of sharp that made the intruders think twice. "You're on my land," he said flatly. "Not for long," the older man replied. "Just came to talk." "You ain't talked in 5 years, Royce." "Well, things change." Thomas's grip on the rifle didn't shift. "Not you." Royce stepped forward slowly, hands raised in mock surrender. Now, let's not make this ugly." Thomas's voice dropped to something colder than frost. "You already did." Royce looked past him to June. "Who's the girl?" Thomas didn't answer, just raised the barrel an inch. Royce snorted. "Fine, we'll go, but I'll be back, Thomas, real soon, and next time I won't bring manners." They left in a cloud of dust. Thomas did lower the rifle until they disappeared behind the ridge. That night June spoke first. "Who was he?" "Someone I once called brother." June's heart sank. "By blood, not by bond," Thomas added. "He tried to take everything after Sarah passed, said Clara'd be better off with folks who had money." "Would she have?" "Maybe, but not love." Silence. "Are they coming back?" "Count on it." "Then we need to prepare." "You planning on staying now?" "I never said I'd leave." Thomas looked at her long. "No, you didn't." The next morning didn't come gently. The wind had shifted overnight, dragging with it the stench of smoke from somewhere deeper in the valley, old wood, maybe pine. But it wasn't fire Thomas smelled when he stepped out the door, boots scraping the porch boards. It was threat, and it was coming closer. Royce had always been a patient kind of poison, the sort that grinned while it sank teeth deep. Thomas knew his brother well enough to feel the clock ticking. If Royce had ridden off the day before, he'd be back soon, and not with banter. He'd be back with men, maybe guns, and worse than either, legal papers forged in some saloon and branded with a liar's seal. Thomas had been content with solitude, raising Clara alone, scraping by with what the land allowed. But now, with June sleeping in the barn and his brother smelling weakness like a wolf, the stakes had shifted. He wasn't just protecting a child now. He was protecting the thin thread of a life that might have meant something again. Inside, June stirred from the mattress in the loft. Thomas had brought it down from the barn the night before, after the Royce incident, though neither of them had said anything about it. She'd come in after dark, carried the lantern herself, and laid down across the room from Clara's cradle without asking permission. She didn't need it anymore. He'd left the rifle by the door that night. June descended the stairs silently, her bare feet brushing the worn wood. "You sleep?" he asked. "A little," she said. "Clara breathes like waves, you notice that?" "Yeah. She's peaceful." Thomas glanced toward the cradle. "She don't know what's out there." "Good," June said. "Let her stay that way." He poured 2 cups of coffee, bitter again but hot, and handed her one. "We'll need to move the goats closer to the cabin, and bring in the axe. If Royce comes, he's not bringing paper, he's bringing noise." June took a sip. "Then we make sure it stays quiet." They worked the day without wasting words. June mended feed sacks while Thomas reinforced the barn's outer door with cross beams. He taught her how to check the traps he'd set around the perimeter, not for rabbits this time, but for warning. Trip lines tied with bits of tin to rattle when kicked. Nothing lethal, just loud, enough to know when footsteps were close. By midday, the sun had found teeth. It baked the dust into the planks and made the iron nails too hot to touch without cloth. Clara fussed once, then slept again on a sling June fashioned from an old curtain. She wore the child against her chest as she worked, without complaint. Thomas watched them from across the yard, saw the way June moved now, deliberate, steady, not just surviving. There was something maternal in the way she shifted her body to shield Clara's face from the sun, something instinctive in the way her hand never strayed far from the small weight on her chest. He'd known women who smiled while they held a child. June didn't smile, but she radiated something truer. Grit, maybe, or grace. He found himself trusting her without permission. Late afternoon brought visitors again, but not the kind they feared. A wagon approached from the southern trail, old, slow, drawn by a mule that looked ready to lie down and never rise again. The driver was a man past 50, skin like leather, hat pulled low. A younger woman sat beside him, her belly round with child, her eyes darting nervously as they neared the gate. Thomas stepped forward, hand near the rifle but not on it. The man raised a hand. Peaceful, I swear it. Thomas did lower his stance. Name? Emmett Gray. This here's my daughter, Maybelle. We heard tell of a ranch out here, thought maybe there'd be trade. Got eggs, beans, some medicine root if you've use for it. Thomas narrowed his eyes. You from town? Used to be, not no more. Behind him, June appeared, Clara still sleeping in the sling. Emmett's gaze softened. Didn't know there was a woman out here. Didn't used to be, Thomas said. Emmett caught the edge in his voice and didn't pry. We ain't here to trouble you, just trying to make it to Willow Fork before the baby comes. That's 2 days out. I know she's stubborn, gets it from her mama. Maybelle looked down, cheeks flushed. June stepped forward. They can water the mule, we've got some oats left. Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked at the mule, then the girl's stomach, then finally nodded. Stay by the barn, I'll bring water. They shared no fire that night. Emmett and Maybelle set up camp near the shed, cooking quietly over a small flame they built themselves. June brought them some leftover stew, insisted they eat the meat while it still had life in it. Emmett offered her a small pouch of crushed herbs in thanks. For aches, he said, or for breathin', helps either way. Clara woke that night fussy, her face red with heat. June dipped the herbs in boiling water, then held the steam near the cradle. The baby quieted within minutes. You did good, Thomas said softly. It wasn't me, she replied. It was the root. Still, you knew. She looked at him then, eyes shadowed but steady. I know what it is to have no one. Thomas sat beside her. The fire cracked softly. You think we can stop him? She asked. Royce? Yeah. Only if we're willing to bleed for it. June didn't flinch. I've bled before, just didn't have anyone worth bleeding for. He looked at her, long and careful. You do now. June glanced toward the cradle. I think maybe I do. The next day began with silence deep, unnatural. The kind that made birds vanish and dogs hide under porches. Thomas noticed it first. The goats didn't bleat. The hens stayed quiet. Even the mule by the barn pawed nervously, ears twitching. Then the tin rattled. 3 clinks, sharp, too far east. Thomas grabbed the rifle. June lifted Clara without needing to be told. Royce came over the ridge with 5 men. Not 3, 5. One held a shotgun, another carried chains. Royce himself rode a painted stallion like he owned the sky. Morning, brother, he called, smiling like a preacher at a funeral. Turn around, Thomas barked. Royce dismounted. You always were rude. Thomas stepped forward. This is my land, these are my people, you're not welcome. People, huh? Royce glanced at June, then the baby. You replaced Sarah already. Thomas didn't answer. Shame, Royce said. She was better looking. June moved to stand beside Thomas. Clara still pressed close. Royce tilted his head. You letting your women do the staring now. June's voice didn't waver. I'm doing more than staring, I'm remembering. Royce smirked. Remember this, girl, I got paper says this land's mine. You forged it, Thomas said. Who's gonna prove it? Sheriff's in my pocket, judge too. Thomas raised the rifle. That's so. You shoot me, Royce said, and your baby loses her uncle. That's family blood in her too. You gave up that right when you tried to take her. Royce shrugged. Fine, I'm not here to argue, just here to claim what's mine. Move your girl, move your baby, you got till sundown. He turned and rode off. The others followed, no shots fired. Not yet. That night June couldn't sleep. She sat by the cradle, watching Clara breathe. Thomas sat by the window, the rifle across his knees. You could run, he said quietly. Take her, head north. June didn't turn, and leave you to bleed alone. You don't owe me anything. I owe Clara. You don't even know her. She knows me, June whispered. That's enough. Thomas looked at her, and for the first time since she knocked on his door, he saw not a stranger, not a guest, but someone meant to be there. He nodded slowly. We fight at dawn. Dawn came slower than expected. The sky was the color of old ash, thick with a haze that clung to the horizon like the breath of something waiting to exhale. Thomas Cade stood by the window long before the sun had the strength to breach the ridge. His rifle was loaded. 2 extra rounds rested on the windowsill. He'd cleaned the barrel twice, though it hadn't needed it. Sometimes a man's hands needed purpose more than his tools did. June sat nearby, spooning boiled oats into Clara's mouth with a steadiness that betrayed the fear behind her eyes. The baby chewed lazily, eyes drifting from her makeshift mother to the flicker of light creeping through the shutter cracks. She knows, June said suddenly. Thomas looked over. That something's wrong. Babies know, maybe not in their minds but in their bones. Thomas nodded slowly. World teaches early. She deserves better than this, June whispered, smoothing Clara's curls. She's got better, he said, now. Neither of them had spoken about the night before, about Royce's threat or the deadline that now ticked like thunder just outside the valley. But the silence wasn't ignorance. It was armor. Each word held now was a bullet saved, a breath banked for what was to come. By mid-morning, the stillness broke. Emmett Gray and his daughter approached from the barn, their camp broken down to almost nothing. The old man had a sawed-off tucked under his coat and the same wary squint he'd had since the day he arrived. You planning to ride out? Thomas asked, stepping onto the porch. No, Emmett said, not without paying rent. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You let us water our mule, gave us fire, my Maybell's safe here, that counts for something. You sure you want to get involved? Emmett spat. I was born involved, son, ain't gonna die hiding. Thomas looked past him to Maybell, who stood near the barn doors with a pistol gripped awkwardly in both hands. You shoot. Enough to miss Slow, she said. It wasn't funny, but Thomas cracked a half-smile anyway. We'll take all the hands we can get. The house was fortified first. June helped barricade the windows, dragging barrels and old planks across the glass. She nailed shut the back door and moved Clara's cradle into the pantry, small, windowless, thick walls. Safe. They built a line of defense near the main gate, upturned troughs, spare logs, crates filled with scrap iron. Emmett and Thomas scouted the tree line, setting more of the tin rattle traps, this time tied to trip lines anchored beneath brush. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of bruised peaches, swollen with coming heat and the scent of dust and gun oil. Thomas stood on the porch sharpening a knife he hadn't used in years. June sat on the steps, cradling Clara against her chest while she rocked gently with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. I ain't scared, she said. Thomas didn't look at her. I am. June didn't move. Not of dying, I've already done that once, up on that ridge, when I buried her. He set the knife down. Then what? I'm scared of losing again, of getting to hold something good and having it ripped away because I believed too hard it might last. Thomas sat beside her. You and me both. They came at dusk. 6 riders this time, not 5. Royce had brought an extra. One was a kid barely old enough to shave. Another looked half-mad with eyes that twitched and a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. But the rest, hard men, hired, paid not to ask questions. Royce led them down the ridge like a wedding procession, slow, confident, unafraid. The stallion beneath him gleamed like oiled black steel, tail swishing against the dry wind. Thomas stepped out first, rifle aimed but not raised. Emmett flanked him with the sawed-off. June was behind the door, pistol gripped in her apron pocket, Clara now sleeping soundly in the pantry behind 2 layers of oak. Royce pulled up just short of the yard. "Evening," he called. Thomas didn't answer. Royce laughed. "Come on, brother, this don't have to end ugly. You should leave. You always were hard-headed." Thomas took 1 step forward. "And you were always a coward, hiding behind law you bought and men you didn't raise." Royce's smile faltered. "I'm taking what's mine," he said. "You can hand it over or I'll take it with smoke." Thomas's voice didn't waver. "Then bring the smoke." The first shot came from the hired man with the twitching eye. It cracked the silence like lightning, splitting the air just above the porch rail. Thomas ducked, returned fire. His round caught the horse's flank, not fatal, but enough to throw the rider. Then chaos. Gunfire echoed off the valley walls, sharp and ugly. Emmett's sawed-off blasted a hole through one man's shoulder, sending him reeling backward, screaming. June fired from the window, missing high, but the shot made one rider dive for cover behind the troughs. Royce didn't fire at all, he watched. Thomas reloaded fast, moved from porch to barrel to tree, counting breath and bullets. Another man took a round in the thigh and crawled into the scrub. The kid panicked, dropped his weapon, and ran straight into one of the trip lines. The tin clanged like a devil's bell. He screamed, stumbled, vanished into the brush. Inside, Clara cried. June heard it like a dagger to the heart but didn't move. Not yet. One more round rang out. Then silence. Smoke curled from the rifle barrels. Dust settled in waves. The yard looked like a broken game board, weapons discarded, blood darkening the dirt in ugly puddles. Royce still sat his horse. Thomas leveled the rifle at him. "This your idea of justice?" Royce sneered. "This is the cost of what you stole." "I didn't steal Sarah from you." "No," Royce spat, "but you got what I never could, a life." His hand twitched toward his holster. June saw it from the doorway. She stepped out. "Don't," she said. Royce looked at her. "You think I won't shoot a woman? I think you'll die trying." Something in her eyes made him pause. His fingers loosened. Thomas didn't wait. One shot. Quick, clean. Royce fell. His body hit the ground with a thud that felt final. It didn't take long to clean up. The hired men who could still walk dragged their wounded and vanished. The boy who'd fled never came back. Emmett helped bury the bodies near the ridge, simple holes, no crosses. Royce went deeper, alone. When it was done, Thomas washed his hands in the trough and stood over the dirt, silent. June came to him. "You okay?" "No," he said, "but I will be." She didn't try to comfort him, just stood beside him in the quiet. That night, Clara slept through the dark without waking once. June did not. She sat by the cradle, whispering prayers she thought she'd forgotten. Soft, ragged thanks to a God she once cursed beneath her breath but never truly abandoned. Thomas came in late, blood clean from his shirt, shoulders heavy with grief and something deeper. "Wasn't supposed to end like that," he said. "Maybe it didn't," she replied. He looked at her. "We're still here, she's still breathing. That's an ending I can live with." Thomas sat beside her, closer this time. "She's not mine, you know, not by blood." June blinked. "What?" "Sarah was already pregnant when I met her. The man ran off. I took them both, never told a soul." June looked down at Clara, sleeping with a fist curled near her chin. "She's still yours," she whispered. in every way that matters. Thomas exhaled, long and slow. I don't know what comes next. Neither do I, June said, but I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since the knock, since the crust of bread, since the baby in her arms, he allowed himself to believe in something past tomorrow. The valley woke slowly in the days after Royce's blood sank into the dirt, as if nature itself needed time to believe the violence had finally stopped. Birds returned first, timid at dawn, singing cautious notes as if testing the silence. Then came the wind, gentler now, brushing through the tall grass like a mother's hand smoothing the brow of a fevered child. Thomas Cade stood by the gate that morning, one hand resting on the post Royce had tried to claim with forged papers and lies. He stared out at the tree line where the riders had vanished, where shadows still lingered despite the sun rising with full intent. Behind him, the house was quiet. Clara slept, June tended the fire, and the wounds of the past 5 days hung in the air like smoke that hadn't found a way out yet. He hadn't slept much, a few hours here and there enough to keep standing, but his thoughts never fully left the porch, the rifle still leaning beside the door, the ground where his brother fell. Thomas had buried many things on this land, fences, livestock, love, but burying blood, even twisted as Royce was, left a different weight on a man's back, one that no plow could unearth. Inside, June stirred a pot of thin stew. Food was running low. They'd survived the attack, but not without cost. 3 bullets remained for the rifle. 1 goat had gone lame, 2 spooked to walk straight. The root cellar held little more than dry beans and faith. But it wasn't the food that worried her, it was Thomas. He'd grown quieter, more watchful. She could see it in the way he moved, efficient, yes, but heavier, like something inside him had cracked, and he was too proud to show the pieces. June understood that weight. She carried it once herself, still did, but hers had shifted the moment Clara first reached for her finger in the dark. By midday, Thomas came inside without a word and poured himself coffee that had gone bitter with reheating. June didn't ask where he'd been. She set a bowl of stew down and sat across from him. "You're not eating," she said. "Not hungry. Clara's going to feel it. Babies always do." He didn't reply, just sipped the coffee and stared out the window. June leaned forward. "You did what you had to do." Thomas's jaw twitched. "I know." "Then stop punishing yourself for it." He looked at her then, not sharply, just wearily. "I never thought it'd be like this, killing your own kin." "You didn't kill your brother," she said softly. "That man died a long time ago. You only buried what was left." That struck something in him. He set the mug down and ran a hand through his hair. "I've had to make peace with a lot of things these past years," she added. "But grief, that one doesn't ask for permission. It just moves in." Thomas leaned back, eyes on the rafters. "He was older than me by 6 years, used to carry me on his shoulders, told me the stars were just holes God poked in the sky so we wouldn't feel alone." June looked down. "Then maybe he wasn't always poison." "No," Thomas whispered, "just got bit by it somewhere." That evening the wind picked up again, but this time it carried voices. Thomas stepped outside, rifle ready but unraised. A small group was making their way up the trail, 4 figures, 2 on horseback, the others on foot. Townfolk by the look of it. Men and women he hadn't seen in years, not since Sarah's funeral, when most came out of obligation and left before the dirt dried on the coffin. He narrowed his eyes as they approached. The lead rider, a broad woman with her hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid, raised a hand. "Thomas Cade." "I am." "We heard there was trouble out this way. Men riding hard, gunfire echoing past the hills." "There was." The woman dismounted. She carried herself like someone used to leading without shouting. "Name, Bertha Combs. I run the apothecary in town." Thomas didn't relax, and when a man kills his brother to protect his child and the land he built, folks ought to know. June stepped onto the porch, Clara in her arms. Bertha gave a faint nod. "You must be June." "I am," she replied cautiously. Bertha turned back to Thomas. "We've got food, tools, hands if you'll take M." Thomas blinked. "Why?" "Because you didn't run," she said. "Because sometimes a man stands his ground not to win, but so others don't have to fight the same war." The others behind her unloaded sacks of grain, jars of preserves, even a bundle of fresh linens. One of the younger women, barely 20, approached June and smiled shyly. "I've got a baby at home, too. Clara's a beautiful name." June's grip on Clara tightened. "She's not mine." The girl tilted her head. "Sure about that?" June looked down at the child, who was staring back up at her with wide, patient eyes. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. That night they had bread, real bread, salted butter, a stew thick enough to stick to a spoon. Clara gurgled on the floor beside the hearth, kicking her feet with the kind of joy that only came when a child felt truly safe. June watched her with a kind of awe. Thomas watched June. He noticed how she leaned forward when Clara squealed, how her lips curled into a smile without her even realizing it. He saw the care in her hands, the way she tucked the quilt just right around the baby's legs. These weren't acts of someone helping. They were the motions of someone who belonged. After the visitors left, promising to return in a week, June stepped outside with a pail of water and stood beneath the stars. Thomas followed a few moments later. "You didn't have to stay," he said. June didn't look at him. "I didn't have anywhere else." "That's not the same." She turned then. "I know." He stepped closer. "You've done more for Clara in a week than I managed in months." "That's not true." "It feels true." June sighed. "You gave her a home, a roof. You stood between her and death. That's more than most children get." Thomas looked up at the stars. "You believe in what Royce said, about God poking holes." "I don't know," June said, "but I think maybe he lets light through wherever we're cracked." Silence. Then Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a small object, smooth, polished, shaped like a dove. "I carved it the night you arrived," he said, placing it in her hand. "Didn't know why, think maybe I do now." June looked at it, then at him. "You're not alone anymore, Thomas." He met her gaze. "Neither are you." That night Thomas didn't sleep on the porch. He brought the cradle closer to the hearth, sat beside June while she rocked Clara until the baby drifted off. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. The morning after the townsfolk left, the ranch felt unfamiliar in the strangest way. Not because of danger, there was none. No hoofbeats on the ridge, no shadows circling in the distance. The traps remained untouched, the tin strings still and silent. But the unease came from within, like the air had shifted too fast, like their small world had grown too large overnight. Thomas woke before the rooster. His boots found the floor as they always had, but his shoulders felt looser somehow, less bound by grief. He moved through the motions, coffee, stoking the fire, checking the pens, not because of habit anymore, but because there were people now who'd notice if he didn't. When he passed the cradle, Clara stirred. Her small fingers stretched into the early light and then curled back into fists. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. June had already risen and was by her side, lifting her gently, singing a low hymn under her breath. Something old, something warm. Thomas couldn't place it, but it curled around the room like morning smoke. June noticed him watching. "You sleep?" she asked, not breaking rhythm as Clara nuzzled against her. "Some," he answered. "You?" "I dreamed." "Good dream." She hesitated. "I was walking along a ridge. The wind was loud but not cruel, and I wasn't carrying anything heavy for once." Thomas nodded slowly. "Sounds peaceful." "It was," she whispered, "and I woke up feeling like I'd left something behind, something I didn't need anymore." Thomas didn't ask what it was. He figured she didn't know herself. That morning, Thomas walked the perimeter with Emmett, who had stayed behind while Mabel rode back to town to prepare for her child's birth. Emmett had offered no timeline on when he'd leave, and Thomas hadn't asked for one. The old man had become part of the rhythm now, a steady presence with sharp eyes and a quiet way of reminding everyone what mattered. Royce used to talk about this place like it was a throne, Emmett said as they passed the far field. Told folks he'd run it someday. He always did want what wasn't his. Funny how men like that never bother planting anything, but always want to harvest what someone else grew. Thomas didn't smile, but the words sat well with him. They came upon a corner post, crooked from age. Thomas knelt and began prying the rotted wood from the earth. "You think June's staying for good?" Emmett asked casually. Thomas paused. "She hasn't said. But you hope she will." Thomas didn't answer, but his silence said enough. "You're allowed to want that son," Emmett added. "Doesn't make you selfish." Thomas looked out over the fields, dry but alive, needing work, always needing work. "She's lost more than I can name," he said. "Same as me, we came together in the middle of it all, but what happens when the dust settles? What if she wants more than this?" Emmett chuckled softly. "Boy, you got more than most, a roof, a child, a woman who'd walk into gunfire for both. What more are you afraid of?" Thomas didn't have an answer. He just dug deeper into the soil. Inside the house, June wiped down the table with a damp cloth, humming the same melody from that morning. Clara sat in a wooden bowl cushioned with rags, chewing contentedly on a smooth stick Thomas had carved to soothe her teething gums. June's eyes kept drifting to the window. The land looked different now, not in its shape, still endless, still raw, but in its promise. She'd crossed too many miles with nothing but grief in her arms. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she held something that might be her own again. Still, doubt lingered. She was Thomas's wife, not in name, not in deed. She was Clara's mother, not in blood. And yet the baby reached for her, trusted her, quieted at her touch. And Thomas, well, he hadn't locked the door once since she moved inside. She wasn't sure what they were building, but she knew it was something. She stepped outside with Clara just as Thomas returned from the field. The baby squirmed in her arms, reaching toward him. Thomas smiled, small, tired, but real. "Somebody wants to be held," June said, handing Clara over. "She's heavy today," he said, adjusting her carefully. "She's growing." Thomas looked at the child in his arms, then at June. "So are we." That evening, they sat around the table, Clara nestled between them in her cradle, and Emmett carving a piece of driftwood near the hearth. "I was thinking," June said as Thomas passed her a plate of boiled potatoes, "about starting a garden." Thomas looked up. "We've tried before, soil's tricky." "I can try again." He nodded. "You've earned that." She smiled, then sobered. "I'd like to put a marker on the ridge for her." Thomas didn't need to ask who. "We'll do it tomorrow." They left at first light, the three of them. June carried a bundle wrapped in soft cloth, a smooth stone carved with care, and an old blanket that once belonged to her baby girl. Thomas carried Clara in his sling. The hike was short but steep, the ridge rising like a spine from the valley floor. When they reached the spot, June knelt in the grass and laid the stone gently against the earth. "No name," she whispered, "but not forgotten." Clara gurgled softly in Thomas's arms. June turned and smiled through tears. "She would have liked you." Thomas nodded. "I already do." They stayed until the sun rose fully, warming the ridge. Then they returned home together. But peace, like spring, is never promised. It was 2 days later when the new threat arrived. Not with guns, not with smoke, but with paper and a badge. A rider came from the east, dressed too clean for travel, coat pressed, hat stiff, pistol holstered too high to be used. He rode with the arrogance of lawmen who never touched the land they claimed to protect. Thomas met him at the gate. "Marshal Wayne Dunn," the man announced. "I'm here on behalf of Lark County Court." Thomas's stomach dropped. "Royce filed claim on this land months ago," Dunn continued. "Documents say he was wrongfully removed. He's dead. Still has legal rights." Thomas stepped forward. "He tried to steal my daughter. He forged every document he brought. He rode in with men, shot at us. This land's mine, always has been." Dunn shrugged. "Might be, but until a judge says otherwise, you're squatting on a contested claim." Thomas's fists clenched. Dunn pulled out a sealed envelope. "You've got 30 days to vacate or challenge it in court." "There is no court out here," Thomas growled. "There is in Red Brush. You show up, bring witnesses, bring proof, or you lose everything." He turned and rode off without another word. That night June found Thomas sitting outside, the envelope unopened beside him. She didn't ask what was inside. She'd seen enough to know. "They're trying again," he said. "They always do," she replied. "I don't want to lose this." June sat beside him. "Then we fight, not with guns, with truth." Thomas looked at her. "We don't have money for lawyers." "Then we bring the people who were here. Emmett, Bertha, the girl who saw us bury Royce with her own eyes." "You'd come with me?" he asked quietly. June looked toward the house, where Clara slept in peace. "I'd go to the ends of the world for that baby, and for you." He reached for her hand. Held it. Didn't let go. The morning they set out for Red Brush, the sky was streaked with clouds, low, thin, like faded linen pulled across the heavens. It didn't rain, didn't threaten to, but something in the air pressed down on them just the same, like the land knew what was coming and braced for it. Thomas packed light: a sack of dried meat, 1 canteen, a change of shirts, and 3 folded affidavits written in careful pen by Bertha Combs herself. One from her, one from Emmett, and one from a girl named Sarah Lou who'd seen Royce swing at June during the first confrontation. The signatures weren't notarized, but they were real. Honest hands. Truth carried in ink. They hitched the wagon at first light. Emmett held the reins, his face drawn, eyes steady. He would drive. His daughter Mabel had begged him not to go, begged Thomas not to drag him into another man's battle, but Emmett had only said one thing: "When a good man stands up, you stand with him." June sat in the back of the wagon with Clara cradled in her arms, wrapped tight in a knit shawl sent over by one of the women from town. Her cheeks were full and pink from weeks of real food, her eyes brighter than the first time she'd been held under this roof. She had no idea where they were going, what waited in that courtroom. She only knew she was with the people who loved her. And that was enough. The journey took 2 days. Red Brush sat nestled in a gully past the dried-out riverbed where the clay turned dark red and wagons dipped so low they scraped the earth. It had grown since Thomas last saw it, 10 years prior, before Sarah, before Clara, before everything. New storefronts, a proper gallows, a town square with benches instead of stumps, but the people, they looked the same, suspicious, tired, curious about any new wagon that dared roll through. Thomas kept his head down. June didn't. She met the eyes of every person who stared, defiant in the silence. Let them look, she thought. Let them wonder. She had a baby on her hip and a man beside her who'd bled to keep them both alive. That was nothing to lower her head over. They found a small inn with 1 clean room. Emmett insisted June and Clara take the bed while he and Thomas split the floor. No one complained. That night Thomas sat at the window, staring out over the lamplights of Red Brush. "They've got judges here now," he murmured. "Real ones. They wear robes, swear oaths. I remember when this town settled scores with bullets." June sat on the edge of the bed, rocking Clara gently. "Maybe it still does, just wears better clothes." Thomas looked back at her. "What if we lose?" She met his eyes. "Then we start over." With what? With each other. The silence held between them like a fragile thing. Then Clara yawned, loud and wet, and both of them chuckled softly. Thomas stood and crossed the room. Can I? June handed the baby over, and Thomas held her to his chest, her heartbeat fluttering against his like a bird behind ribs. She's grown, he whispered. So have you, June said. The courtroom was smaller than expected. Just 2 rows of benches, a thick counter for the judge, and dust motes that danced in shafts of light like they didn't care who won or lost. Judge Merriweather was a round man with thick glasses and a mouth that pursed when he read. He looked over the documents slowly, nodding here and there, making small noises with the back of his throat. The prosecutor, a thin man named Hadley, presented the claim Royce had filed. It was full of holes, contradictions, and sloppy phrasing, but it was sealed. That gave it weight. Mr. Cade, the judge said, looking up, you claim this land is yours. Yes, sir. You have deeds. I've got the original grant from my grandfather. Signed, dated, stamped by Lark County. Hadley scoffed. That paper's 30 years old. It's older than Royce's lies, Thomas replied. Merriweather frowned at the tone, but said nothing. He turned to June. And you, miss? June Mather. You live on this land as well. I do, help raise the child, feed the goats, run the fence. You're not married? No, sir. He looked at Clara. The child, she's yours. She's ours, June said, firm. Her blood may not be mine, but I'd bleed for her just the same. This court recognizes Thomas Cade as the rightful owner of the land in question. All prior claims filed by Royce Cade are hereby nullified. The gavel dropped. Hard. Final. June let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Thomas reached for her hand, held it tighter than before. Outside, the street was bright. The sun had returned fully, banishing the red clay shadows. People had gathered around the courthouse steps. Not many, but enough. They nodded at Thomas, at June, at the baby who now kicked her legs with delight. Emmett slapped Thomas on the back. Told you. Thomas nodded. Yeah. Now let's get home. The journey back felt shorter. June rode up front this time, Clara in her lap, one hand on the reins when Emmett dozed. Thomas walked alongside for miles, boots crunching in rhythm with the wheels, eyes scanning the horizon like he expected something else to rise and challenge what they'd won. But nothing came. Just wind. And peace. Back at the ranch, the goats bleated a welcome. The chickens, fed by Bertha and the others in their absence, pecked at the dirt with casual disinterest. The porch sagged a little more, but it stood. The hearth inside still smelled of pine smoke. The cradle was right where they left it. Thomas set the bag down and looked around. It was home. Still. June stepped in behind him, Clara on her hip. I never had a place like this, she said. You do now. June turned to him, eyes bright. You sure? Thomas nodded. I've fought for it, bled for it, buried family over it, and you're the best thing in it. June laughed, soft and full. I should be flattered. You should be loved. She looked at him. And you? I should be forgiven. She leaned in. Then forgive yourself, because I already have. He kissed her then, not rushed, not uncertain, just right. And Clara squealed between them like she knew exactly what it meant. Summer came early that year. The snowmelt thinned quicker than expected, feeding creeks that swelled briefly before settling into lazy warmth. Grass sprouted where dust once rained. The fields greened. Birds built nests in the rafters of the barn. The valley, long scarred by silence and sorrow, began to breathe again. So did they. Thomas, June, and little Clara made their lives in rhythm with the land, quiet, deliberate, stitched with small joys that once would have gone unnoticed. Mornings began with soft clatter in the kitchen. June at the stove, Clara babbling from the cradle. Thomas took to waking before sunrise, checking fence lines not because he feared invasion, but because he had something worth protecting. Emmett stayed on through the first planting. Said he'd leave once the first green broke the soil, but every day he found a reason to linger. Fixed the well pump, repaired a broken axle on the wagon, built a bench under the cottonwood tree for Maybelle when she visited with her newborn boy, a stout, pink-faced infant who cried like a rooster and clung to Emmett's finger like it was the last thing in the world. "It's funny," Emmett said one afternoon as he and Thomas hauled hay into the barn, "how men go looking for peace like it's a town on a map. Then it sneaks up on you, wears the face of a baby, or a woman, or a field that finally gives back." Thomas nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Took me too long to realize it wasn't something you find, it's something you make." The sun hung low by the time they finished. June stood at the porch, waving a cloth as they approached. "Supper's hot, come before it burns." Inside, the table was set, simple bowls of potato stew, thick bread, goat cheese wrapped in leaves. Clara clapped from her high chair, gums showing in a gummy smile that melted every part of Thomas that had once grown hard. They ate like people who'd known hunger. They laughed like people who'd been silent too long. They prayed not out of ritual, but from gratitude. That night, after Emmett retired to the spare room and the fire had turned to coals, Thomas and June sat on the porch with Clara nestled between them in a blanket. The stars were fierce that night, bright, close, unblinking. "I never thought I'd make it this far," June said, voice soft. "I never thought I'd want to," Thomas replied. June leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think God had forgotten me, left me to suffer for some reason I didn't understand. But now—" He waited. "Now I think maybe he was just making room." "For what?" "For all this." Thomas reached over and placed his hand on hers. "You gave me back a reason to believe in tomorrow." She smiled. "You gave me a reason to believe I could still be a mother." Clara stirred in her blanket, made a small noise, and then settled again. "She's going to grow up strong," Thomas said. "She already is," June whispered. The seasons passed. Spring bloomed into summer, and summer melted into a long, golden autumn. June's garden took root, sprouting beans, carrots, even squash in the lean corners behind the cabin. The townsfolk came by more often, dropping off seed, offering trade, sharing news. Clara grew faster than the calendar allowed, taking her first steps across the porch with Thomas holding one hand and June the other. Her first word was "Ma." June cried for an hour afterward, then baked 2 loaves of bread and gave one to the widow down the trail who'd helped during planting season. "For gratitude," she said, though the woman never asked what for. Thomas built a second cradle that fall, not out of need but hope. He carved birds into the frame, not because Clara liked them, though she did, but because it reminded him of the first gift he ever gave June, the dove, the day he realized he wasn't meant to be alone anymore. He planted a sapling near Royce's grave. No marker, just a tree, something that would live where his brother didn't, a peace offering for a soul that never found rest. Emmett eventually left, but not far, built a cabin a mile out, close enough to visit, far enough to keep his independence. Maybelle came every week, her baby on her hip, her laugh loud and frequent. The children grew together like weeds between fence posts, sturdy and stubborn. One evening, years later, as the sun set red over the ridge and the air turned crisp with early winter, Thomas and June sat on the same porch with Clara nestled between them, taller now, her curls longer, her eyes still bright. "I asked Miss Bertha today about the stars," Clara said, pointing upward. "And what did she say?" June asked. "She said they're suns like ours, far away." Thomas smiled. "She's right. But you told me once they were holes God poked in the sky, so we wouldn't feel alone." Thomas chuckled. Maybe both are true. Clara frowned. Can that happen? Sometimes the best truths come in pairs, June said gently, like you and us. The child nodded, satisfied with the answer, then yawned wide. Thomas lifted her and carried her inside, settling her beneath the same quilt she'd known since that desperate night June first knocked on his door. Back on the porch, June remained seated, eyes on the stars. You think she'll remember? She asked when Thomas returned. Remember what? That we didn't start with much, that she came from sorrow but was never defined by it. Thomas slid into the chair beside her. She'll remember what we built. That's what matters. June reached for his hand. He took it, laced his fingers through hers. The wind rustled the trees gently. The house creaked like an old man settling into rest. And the valley, once scarred by silence, now echoed with a peace no court, no storm, no ghost could take. They had begun as strangers, her with nothing but an empty stomach and a heart full of grief, him with a cradle and a wound that wouldn't scab. But in each other, they had found a reason to try again. Not just for a slice of bread, not just for a place to sleep, but for family, for home, for something worth staying for. And as the stars blinked above them, sunlight from the past and promise for the future, June leaned against Thomas's shoulder and whispered the words that had waited years to be spoken. I'm ready to be your wife. Thomas didn't speak. He only nodded, pulled her hand to his lips, and kissed it with the quiet reverence of a man who knew the worth of what he held. And inside, Clara dreamed beneath the roof love had built from ruin.